रोशनी का कारवां.
This podcast is brought to you by Score Foundation.
ये है रोशनी, रोशनी, रोशनी का कारवां, रोशनी. Eyeway, ये है रोशनी का कारवां.
Hi, my name is George Abraham. Welcome to Eyeway Conversations. My guest today is Nipun Malhotra, the founder of Nipman Foundation. Hi, Nipun, welcome.
Hi, George. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Nipun, let's begin by understanding what is the Nipman Foundation.
I was born with a disability called arthrogryposis, which basically means that the muscles in my arms and legs are not fully developed at birth and they would remain like that throughout my lifetime. I am a wheelchair user. I was pretty lucky in my life that my mother decided to give me a completely normal and independent life. I went to a normal school. I went to St. Stephen's College for my graduation after that, and I was doing my master's at the Delhi School of Economics when really the ignition for Nipman Foundation happened. During my master's, what I did is that I decided to sit for placements. And when I sat for placements, I kind of saw the discrimination persons with disabilities face firsthand when they really apply for jobs, where it's really not the person that's looked at, but unfortunately it was the disability that's looked at. I often, joke that whenever I was entering a job interview at that stage, Nipun Malhotra used to stay outside the interview, but it's only the wheelchair that used to go in because all the questions would be related to my disability in that sense. And obviously after around a dozen attempts, did not get any job.
Right.
And that's what really motivated me to start the Nipman Foundation. I started the Nipman Foundation along with my mother in 2012. And initially, one of our main focus areas was to change perceptions in organizations around how people with disabilities are treated through sensitization workshops, physical accessibility audits, etc.
When you talk about the Nipman Foundation, specifically, what are the activities you do towards addressing the attitude change?
We do a bunch of things. One of the things that we were doing from 2014 till COVID started was the Equal Opportunity Awards, where we were working along with Microsoft to recognize companies that employ people with disabilities, raise awareness about innovations that are happening in the tech space for people with disabilities, etc. We had the honor of having you on our jury as well, George. So you yourself know a lot about, the kind of perceptions and changes those awards were taking. Apart from that, I've also done stand-up comedy. I've created satirical videos. I have this video series called Baba Wheelchair, through which I was trying to spread a message on how people with disabilities are perceived. I have also, I also believe that there are three challenges people with disabilities face, and I like to call it the 3 A's model, which is attitudes, accessibility, and affordability.
Yeah.
And I've been writing heavily on that, speaking heavily on that in various colleges, organizations, etc. And I also write a lot on various challenges people with disabilities face. So these are some of the things that we do when it comes to attitudinal shifts. Apart from that, we also run a wide variety of programs. For example, we run this program called Wheels for Life, which is a crowdfunding program through which we've donated close to 2,000 wheelchairs to various people who need wheelchairs across the country in that sense and who cannot afford them. These are some of the activities that the foundation has been doing.
Now, recently, Nipun, you had filed a case in the court, Supreme Court, I think, where it was kind of a response to something that you saw in the film Aankh Micholi. And I think the case was filed against Sony Pictures. So to begin with, what prompted you to file this case?
Right. So in October last year, a friend of mine brought to my notice this movie called Aankh Micholi that I felt was very derogatory towards persons with disabilities. For those who have not seen Aankh Micholi referred to somebody who has a speaking problem or, maybe who stammers perhaps as an Atki Cassette. Somebody who has memory loss as Bulakkar Baap.
Yeah.
And night blindness was totally misrepresented in the movie.
Yeah.
Besides that, the crux of this movie really was that if you are a person with a disability and you want to get married, the best probability of that happening is if you hide your disability in that sense. I found this to be in very bad taste. And what happens is that I personally feel movies really create or propagate stereotypes that exist in society when it comes to disability. And in this particular movie, it's not only propagating stereotypes, but it's perhaps reinforcing some of the stereotypes that already exist too, in relation to marriage, etc.
Right.
So I thought that such movies are not really good for society, and just for some slapstick humor and earning money at the cost of disability. In that sense, it's wrong for an international production house like Sony Entertainment Pictures to come out with a movie like this. And I actually went to the Delhi High Court earlier this year in January. I lost the case there, and I then went to the Supreme Court, and I'm grateful to the Supreme Court for the intervention that they've made, where for the first time they've created guidelines on the portrayal of persons with disabilities in cinema.
On what grounds did the Delhi High Court reject not rule on this petition of yours?
So the Delhi High Court took a very libertarian view, where they said that freedom of speech and expression should not really be interfered with, and everybody has a right to have freedom of speech and expression in any sense. But you must remember that when Article 19, which talks about freedom of speech and expression, actually has a section that puts restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech and expression has never really been absolute, not only in India, but in any democratic country. Every right must come with a responsibility in that sense. And that was really what our argument was in the Supreme Court in response to what the Delhi High Court passed its order on.
When you were actually filing this case in the Supreme Court, what were the specific pleas that you actually made? Was it just one plea about the portrayal, or the whole plea was kind of divided into several different points?
No, there were several pleas that we made in our petition.
Yeah.
I'll mention some of the key ones. One of them that we spoke about was that the Central Bureau of Film Certification needs to have a person with a disability on board.
Yeah.
I've always been a proponent of the fact that, there's nothing about us without us in that sense.
Yes.
And in fact, the disability movement has taken that one step further, saying nothing without us now.
Yeah.
And I feel that it's important that every movie should be looked at from a disability lens as well.
Yes.
Just like today, I mean, it's a given that it will be looked at from a gender lens in that sense.
Yeah.
There will be a woman on board in creating a movie in the CBFC and at every stage in that sense. I cannot imagine a movie being made by all men, for example.
Yeah.
So just like that, inputs from disability are critical in every movie, whether it's a disability movie or a non-disability movie, because disability is a cross-sectional issue, as everyone knows.
Yes.
The second thing that we asked for is that, in some ways, Sony Pictures must face some consequences for what they have done.
Yeah.
And what we asked for is that perhaps they should fund and create a movie raising awareness about the RPWD Act. We felt that would be the perfect way to, get something material in return, which is in benefit for the disability sector.
Yeah.
And the third, of course, was to look at this movie and ensure that in some way such movies do not come out in the future. We were not asking for any specific ban or anything on this movie. This movie was already out, and nor is that something that we wanted in specific, but we wanted these mistakes to be corrected in the future at least. So yeah, those were my main three requests. What we also did is that we did a survey amongst the disabled community, and we submitted inputs from various persons with disabilities from all walks of life. So those were some of my petitions.
If you know of anyone with vision impairment who needs guidance on living life with blindness, please share the Eyeway National Toll-Free Helpline number 1-800-5320-469. The number is 1-800-5320-469.
Rulings by the Supreme Court on your petition, what were the key rulings which you think were your points of victory, and what were the things that you were disappointed by?
So I'll go through what are some of the key rulings from the judgment itself. The first ruling itself, and I'm going to read out the first line from it. I won't read all the points point-wise, because I think that will take too long.
Yeah.
The first point itself was that words cultivate institutional discrimination. And the Supreme Court actually went on to say that terms such as cripple and spastic have a devalued meaning in society, and they should be totally avoided. Using these two words is not an exhaustive list from the Supreme Court, but more of an indicative list. Basically, what they're trying to say that is that any word that creates a negative self-image and perpetuates discrimination should completely be avoided in usage in films. The second point that they said that is that language that individualizes the impairment and overlooks or disabling social barriers should also be avoided. This includes words like afflicted, suffering, victim, uh, and these words are often used in all kinds of media. So I'm glad that they actually spoke about this. We in the disability sector have been fighting against such usage often. For example, I find it very annoying when newspapers, when they write about me, they call me wheelchair bound, or they use the word that he's a victim. And I'm sure you feel the same way, and most people in the disability sector feel the same way as well.
Now, this point was something which was there in your petition, or this was something which the court spoke on their own initiative?
This was indicatively there in our petition because we actually gave concrete examples from the movie where similar language was used in that sense.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that the court took a larger picture and said that, in general and visual media as well, this should absolutely be unacceptable.
Yeah. What were the other points?
The third point was that creators must check for actual representation of a medical condition as much as possible. I think this came from the fact that night blindness was shown in a totally wrong way in the movie.
Yeah.
And this leads to a lot of danger as well. And it's interesting that they've actually included this point because I think this point does not only affect disability but all kinds of medical conditions. I have a friend of mine who's a director at the Niti Aayog right now, Urvashi Prasad,
Yeah.
who has cancer. She has a late stage of cancer.
Yeah.
And she sent out an interesting tweet about how this point might actually help people who have cancer as well, because in often, unfortunately, in movies, when you want to really show a non-violent death for somebody,
Yeah.
you almost always really show that this person is suffering from cancer, and they use the word suffering as well,
Yeah.
or is a cancer victim or whatever, and this person is dying because of that, and that becomes the most convenient way to show somebody's death. It's also shown as a doom and gloom prognosis where somebody really cannot recover in that sense. So I think checking for actual representation of medical conditions is something that is going to go way beyond disability to all kinds of medical conditions when they are portrayed in movies, because we need to show a 360-degree way in which medical conditions are, and it needs to be realistic. There needs to be medical backing to the kind of medical condition that you're showing.
Kind of fact check, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can't just use a word for the sake of it and then show totally different symptoms or a totally different reality to what that condition really means. Because
it could be very misleading also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and carrying on with your points, yeah.
Yeah. The next point that they spoke about is that persons with disabilities are underrepresented. Average people are unaware of the barriers persons with disabilities face, and visual media must reflect their lived experience. I'm glad they used the word must, because when it becomes must, it becomes a kind of a legal mandate, right? When the Supreme Court talks about it.
Yeah.
So it's another push really that visual media must be reflecting the real lived experiences. This builds on upon point number 3, where I spoke about how you need to check for actual representation.
Yeah.
But this point actually goes on to say that the portrayal must capture the multitudes of the lived experience and should not be a unidimensional ableist characterization. I also think that when movies show people with disabilities, and when I'm talking about movies, I should actually be talking about visual media, because today movies are a small fraction of visual media, right?
Right.
You have OTT platforms, you have YouTubers, etc., as well, which get covered by this judgment.
Plus television.
When persons with disabilities are often shown, it's only their disability characteristic that is shown, but human beings contain multitudes. Disability is not the only characteristic within the person. So it's important to look at people with disabilities beyond just their disability and look at them as a complete human being when they are represented in visual media as well. And I think this point really reflects that in that.
No, I think that's a very powerful point, because most people stop at the disability and don't see the person behind the entity who has the disability.
Right.
So I think it's a very good point. Well, these are the points that the Supreme Court...
There are a few more points. You want me to go through all of them?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
The fifth point, and I'm going to read out this fifth point in full, because I think this is a point that can be debated a bit. What it basically says is that visual media should strive to depict the diverse realities of persons with disabilities showcasing not only the challenges but also the successes, talents, and contributions to society. This balanced representation can help dispel stereotypes and promote a more inclusive understanding of disability. Such portrayals should reflect the multifaceted lives of persons with disabilities, emphasizing their roles as active community members who contribute meaningfully across various spheres of life. By highlighting their achievements and everyday experiences, media can shift the narrative from one of limitation to one of potential and agency. Now, I think this point can really be interpreted in two ways. One, of course, it is great to show the achievements and accomplishments of persons with disabilities. But I hope media also doesn't get into a trap where, it's showing persons with disabilities just as inspiration porn, as it's called, where, it's just inspiring stories of disability that are covered and not multifaceted lives of persons with disabilities, as was reflected in point number 4.
Right.
What another trend that I've seen a lot in movies and various other representation of persons with disabilities is that sometimes media starts overcompensating, right? For example, you might almost create a superhero figure with a disability because they show that, there's that Hindi saying कि इसका अगर कुछ भगवान ने इसका कुछ दिया है तो कुछ और दिया होएगा.
Right.
So I hope that unrealistic portrayal also doesn't start happening because of this point, and that is just one warning I wanted to give to media houses, though I think the first 4 points cover that. This is just a flag I wanted to raise when I highlighted point number 5.
Right. Any other points?
Yeah. Point number 6, it says that they should neither be lampooned based on myths nor presented as super cripples on the other extreme. This actually corrects point number 5 in many ways as well, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court did that because this super cripple thing often happens, right? So that's what point number 6 talks about. And point number 7 talks about decision-making bodies must bear in mind the values of participation. The nothing about us without us principle is based on the promotion of participation of persons with disabilities and equalization of opportunities. It must be put to practice in constituting statutory committees and inviting expert opinions for assessing the overall measure of films and their impact on dignity of individuals under the Cinematography Act and rules. So I think this is again an important point. It's an advisory point, this particular point, where it's saying that decision-making bodies are recommended by the Supreme Court really to include persons with disabilities. So while they've not clearly said that the censor board should have a person with a disability, perhaps they felt that it's beyond the court's reach to do that. Even though I disagree, I think the court could easily have done that as well. I'm grateful to the court for saying that decision-making bodies should, in the court's opinion, have persons with disabilities included in them. Point number 8 talks about the fact that CRPD also requires consultation with and involvement of persons with disabilities in its implementation of measures to encourage portrayal that is consistent with it. Collaboration with disability advocacy groups can provide invaluable insights and guidance on respectful and accurate portrayals, ensuring their content aligns with the lived experience of persons with disabilities. It's another strong statement by the court about the fact that there's nothing about us without us, and persons with disabilities should be included when any portrayal of persons with disabilities is done. Point number 9 talks about training and sensitization programs and how training and sensitization programs are important for all stakeholders in creating visual media content. And yeah, that was the last point. So I think the court has stopped just short of saying that the CBFC should have people with disabilities, must have people with disabilities, by saying that they should have, along with giving all these other guidelines on how people with disabilities should be portrayed.
This is fantastic that the court has given this ruling. But now the big question is, how does this translate into action? How do you see this kind of moving forward?
There are a couple of things that will happen due to this.
Yeah.
Media houses, of course, will take notice of this judgment. The visual media industry is one of the industries which is litigated the most about. So I'm sure they'll notice it because they will not want to go through what Sony Entertainment Pictures went through, where the Supreme Court itself also recognized that Aankh Micholi is lampooning persons with disabilities. Secondly, I think this judgment will also set a precedent where, for example, when a person with a disability themselves feels that a movie is portraying persons with disabilities in a negative way, they can always go even to a lower court. Going to the Supreme Court might not be feasible for everybody, but they could easily go to a lower court quoting the Supreme Court judgment and asking for some kind of relief from any kind of discrimination that they feel persons with disabilities are being portrayed in terms of visual media. So I don't think this is the end of the battle. I think this is just the start of the battle. But for the first time, we really have a tool that is at our disposal to ensure that persons with disabilities are not portrayed in a negative way.
To support our work with the blind and visually impaired, You can visit the donate page on our website www.scorefoundation.org.in. Please note www.scorefoundation.org.in.
Possibilities are many, but in our country, we have noticed that laws are there. There is legal interventions from the courts, but very often the implementation on the ground suffers, primarily because information has not been disseminated. A lot of people at the front end might not necessarily know anything about the law or the court rulings and so on. So, do you think the disability sector needs to play a role, and if so, what kind of role you expect the disability sector plays, so that these laws actually see the light of day in terms of transformation?
I think the disability sector needs to learn a lot from the women's rights movement in that sense.
Yeah.
I think it was sometime in 1997 when the Vishaka Committee guidelines came out, right, for prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace. That was again not a law; it was just a guideline issued by the Supreme Court of India.
Yeah.
But it was the women's rights movement that ensured that they created the right amount of noise so that every organization does not feel that this is just a guideline that should be lying in a drawer and not be taken seriously. By making sure that anybody who violated that guideline was actually taken to court, and that guideline became institutionalized in that sense, which eventually, in fact, even led to the prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace law many years later. Just like that, I think these guidelines are a fantastic tool that have been given to us in the disability sector by the Supreme Court now. It is really up to us to ensure that these guidelines don't just stay on paper, but they're actually used whenever any production house does not abide by these guidelines in that sense. So the disability sector has to play an extremely important role. We have to be watchdogs in that sense. And we must not underestimate the power that movies have in creating societal perceptions, both positive and negative. So it's up to us really to, ensure that whenever we notice something which is against these guidelines, we might not need to go to the Supreme Court anymore now, but complain to the state commissioner of persons with disabilities, or the chief commissioner of persons with disabilities, or even going to a lower court in the country and showing these challenges and quoting these guidelines to ensure that appropriate action is taken. And I think that will definitely ensure that production houses also know that just for some slapstick humor, persons with disabilities cannot be taken lightly.
I'm sure you've been seeing a lot of movies over the years. Are there other movies that you've seen that have kind of struck you as productions which have violated the rights of persons with disability in any way?
So, I think there are two consistent trends when it comes to negative perception of persons with disabilities that exist in movies in India. One is where disability is really looked at as a punishment. And I would like to actually quote from one of the most famous classics in India, really, Sholay. If you remember, have you seen Sholay, George?
Yes, I have. Several times.
Yeah, so if you remember, that Thakur actually, instead of killing Gabbar, actually decides to cut off his hands because he feels that his life will be worse off with hands that are cut rather compared to somebody to killing him. It's in a way trying to show that disability is a bigger punishment than that in that sense. And I find that to be pretty disturbing. Another famous movie that I want to really quote is Kashish. Where there's this evil brother Asrani who torments their sister and brother-in-law. And takes it as a punishment for his acts when he is himself crippled. I'm using the word crippled because that is the language that is used in the movie in that sense.
Right.
Basically what, again, this is trying to show is that disability really is shown as a punishment in these movies. Disability as a comic interlude is something which has been overdone, unfortunately, There are movies like Tom, Dick and Harry, where and Pyare Mohan, where which use the interaction and limitations of the lead characters with different disabilities to entertain the audience. You have movies like Golmaal, Mujhse Shaadi Karogi, and Judai. So I think all these movies are extremely disturbing in that sense. Where disability is just used for laughs. And I think the Supreme Court also made a this is where I actually want to come back to the Supreme Court judgment. Where the Supreme Court actually said that disability humor is fine when you're trying to break societal barriers. What is not fine and what is not acceptable is disabling humor.
Right.
What's disabling humor again is humor that laughs at the disability per se and not situations persons with disabilities face.
Right.
There is a subtle lines difference between the two, but I think it's a very important subtle line in that sense. And that is a differentiation that movie makers need to make when they're making movies.
Well, and on that note, Nipun, thanks for taking the time and thanks for filing this case. And I think we need to do something about creating awareness about what the court had said and make sure that what happens on the ground with movies coming out in future, errors that have been made by people in the past is not really repeated. So all the best and thank you so much for spending this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Eyeway, ये है रोशनी का कारवां.
This podcast was brought to you by Score Foundation.